A prominent Northwest Arkansas doctor facing mounting legal trouble. Dr. Brian Hyatt is a psychiatrist in Rogers. He was also the chair of the state medical board. He resigned from that role in March after claims of Medicaid fraud became public. Although there have been no criminal charges filed against him, the state attorney general's office has launched an investigation. In the meantime, his Medicaid billing privileges have been suspended. Hyatt's attorney promising to appeal, saying that there has not been an effort to intentionally deceive or misrepresent any services provided to a Medicaid recipient. Now he, along with multiple others at Northwest Behavioral Health Unit in Springdale, are facing a growing number of lawsuits. At least 10 former patients have filed suits so far, stemming from their time at Northwest Behavioral Health Unit in Springdale. 3 of those patients had to get court orders to be released from Hyatt's care. Hyatt was the medical director there from 2018 to 2022. In recently filed answers, both Hyatt and the hospital denied the claims in one of the lawsuits. In a KNWA News exclusive, some of those patients filing suits are sharing their story for the first time. These 4 had never met before, but they know each other's stories.
It was a nightmare. I've never been more scared for my freedom and my safety than I have been in that hospital.
They've lived it.
She wanted to hug me, but I was so scared. I mean, I hugged my wife, but I broke the embrace to hurry up and get out of there.
Bonded through experience.
That was the one time I was supposed to get some help. That was the one time I was supposed to be transparent, you know, and honest, and somebody was supposed to help me.
Over the past couple of years, they say their mental health landed them in Dr. Brian Hyatt's care at Northwest Medical Center's Behavioral Health Unit in Springdale.
So I did an intentional suicide attempt by taking multitudes of pills.
I've also dealt with depression, anxiety, the majority of my life.
You know, I lost 2 people very close to me, and found myself pretty distraught at that time, and was taken to the emergency room. I had just gotten off work, found out that I'd lost my brother.
Shannon Williams is a traveling nurse. She believes they were all a part of a billing scheme, one currently being investigated by the state attorney general's office.
Found myself in a nightmare is all I can say that it was. It's just a nightmare.
According to this search warrant affidavit from the state's Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, or MFCU, in April last year, a confidential informant told the MFCU that Dr. Hyatt, quote, had no contact with patients. Although a Medicaid fraud investigator's review of medical claims indicates Hyatt conducted daily face-to-face evaluations. The affidavit said investigators know in March and April of 2022, Hyatt is not communicating with his patients regularly. It continues saying they reviewed several days and hundreds of hours of video and have yet to observe Dr. Hyatt enter a patient's room or otherwise have direct contact with a patient. All 4 former patients we spoke to say they had a similar experience. So remind me, how many days were you there again?
12 days.
12 days. You saw the doctor one time.
Correct.
Shannon, you were there about a week. How much time did you spend with Dr. Hyatt?
I never saw Dr. Hyatt.
Like a max of 2 minutes, maybe.
You're there 8 days. You talked to the doctor for 2 minutes.
Max. I might be giving him too much credit.
So you're there 5 days, never saw the doctor.
Never saw the doctor.
All the while, medical bills piled up. William Van Wy's insurance charged nearly $14,500 for his 5-day stay.
But they have the gall to charge you for this stay.
Yeah.
So they charge your insurance company.
Yeah.
They charge you for this stay.
We found a similar complaint sent to the state medical board back in 2020. Someone writing, Hyatt skipped patient's room one day during morning rounds, but still billed patient as having been seen that day. The board investigated the complaint. In a written response, Hyatt explained his daily routine of going room to room and said, quote, it would be darn near impossible for me to miss a room. Several red flags have popped up with Hyatt's Medicaid billing practices. The affidavit claiming Hyatt repeatedly charged patients with the billing code that paid the most. The investigator says nationally, that code is billed 20.9% of the time. Over a 3-year time span, Dr. Hyatt billed that code 99.95% of the time. The state first noticed this practice back in 2017, before Dr. Hyatt even worked here at Northwest. We actually uncovered an old audit here that shows his Medicaid billing practices have been called into question for years. The Office of Medicaid Inspector General reviewed Hyatt's billing for the entire month of February 2017. It found the only hospital care claim billed was designated for the highest level of initial care. It also found that other services provided were not billed with the proper code. This happened 134 times that month. In some instances, Hyatt underbilled. But in the end, he still had to pay back $9,800. We found that same billing code questioned again in a complaint to the state medical board. In November 2018, a woman wrote the board saying, quote, there was no way her 10 minutes with Dr. Hyatt could justify these charges. Hyatt responding saying, this is fairly ludicrous. He said one of the codes billed could be based on time or complexity of the case. A similar audit for Hyatt's billing in November 2014 also raised concerns. It found 328 instances where documentation does not support procedure code billed. Hyatt had to pay back more than $17,000 that time. He told auditors at the time, quote, I have already instituted meaningful changes to my documentation based on the feedback I have been provided. But behind all those numbers are beneficiaries.
It was like being held ransom.
People. It's like breaking out of jail. You're scared and you're under this rock of power.
And these people say their stories are about more than just Medicaid fraud. Van Wy mentioned jail. That's because he's one of several people to sue Hyatt and the hospital for false imprisonment. Hyatt wasn't served any of the lawsuits before March 31st. The defendants have responded to one of them so far, denying the allegations and asking for the claims to be dismissed. Seen first on KNWA, we've obtained an important piece of evidence the state is using in a Medicaid fraud investigation. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight at 10. I'm Chad Mira. Chelsea Helms has the night off. Rogers psychiatrist and state medical board member Dr. Brian Hyatt had his Medicaid billing privileges suspended while the investigation plays out. The investigation first became public in March when the state released a search warrant affidavit. One thing investigators are doing is looking at old surveillance video of Hyatt at work and comparing it to what patients were actually billed for. We got some of that video. The Medicaid Fraud Control Unit says this is all from March 15th, 2022. Now, we want to mention it was edited before we got it, and we've edited it down more for the sake of time. But it starts off showing Dr. Hyatt entering the hospital. It says it's 6:38 a.m. Then after that, he first enters the patient area of the hospital at 8 a.m. You can see him here. He's the one walking around in black, pushing the computer cart with him. This video was heavily cited when the MFCU applied for a search warrant earlier this year. The warrant affidavit said, quote, he takes the computer cart and walks from one end of the hall to the other. We watched him do this on 3 floors of the hospital. The video says he spent 5 minutes on the 4th floor, 5 more minutes on the 5th floor, and then 4 minutes down on the 3rd floor. The search warrant affidavit points out sometimes he pauses at the rooms and may even look in, but he does not enter the room or have patients come out into the hall. At the end of the video, Hyatt takes his computer cart back to where he first started on the 4th floor. He leaves it there and he leaves the hospital. The video says it's 8:19 a.m. at this time, an hour and 41 minutes after he got to work. Investigators writing in that affidavit, this video reflects Dr. Hyatt's total contact with approximately 74 patients on that day. It continues, Dr. Hyatt's rounds on the unit on this day are completed in an average of less than 20 seconds per patient without entering a patient's room. Although this video is all from the same day, investigators claim they've reviewed several days of surveillance where Hyatt never enters a patient's room. I want to point out now the security footage on the 5th floor specifically was timestamped in the 9 a.m. hour, which doesn't quite line up with the state's assessment. I'm told, though, that investigators believe the timestamp is wrong and this does represent an accurate timeline. Dr. Brian Hyatt is also facing several lawsuits from former patients claiming they were falsely imprisoned. Northwest Medical Center in Springdale and several John Does are also listed as defendants in the suits. We talked to some of those former patients and have more as we continue our investigation. Half his life, William Van Wy's lived with depression and anxiety.
I've always been on medication and trying to balance it.
Last year, he did what he's always done, sought help. He checked himself into Northwest's Behavioral Health Unit.
That unit is straight out of the 1950s, One Flew Out of the Cuckoo's Nest.
Yes.
Once trying to get in, after a few days, he found himself fighting to get out.
I thought many times, hey, I can run out that door and see how far I can go.
Van Wy is one of 11 people who have filed lawsuits against the hospital and its former attending physician, Dr. Brian Hyatt. 7 of them, Van Wy included, are claiming false imprisonment. Van Wy, during his 2022 stay at Northwest Behavioral Unit, even petitioned a circuit court for his own release. That petition claimed Van Wy was being unlawfully detained by Northwest Medical Center and Hyatt. It continues, saying that he demanded his release and has been denied.
I was calling my husband, calling my friends, saying this place is not safe.
The motion for release goes on to say Van Wy's husband even showed up to the facility and asked that he be released and was denied.
I've never felt more threatened than I did right then.
None of it worked until he got this court order for his immediate release.
I have a court order from Judge Taylor in circuit court.
The judge ruled that the Washington County Sheriff or other law enforcement helps enforce it. This body cam video showing that moment.
Yeah, I can't leave until he's released.
It's like breaking out of jail. You're scared and you're under this rock of power, and you get out and you almost don't know what to do with yourself. I asked to leave every day for the last 3 days, and they would not let me leave.
Van Wy wasn't the only one. We found 2 other court orders for the release of patients at Northwest Medical Center Springdale. Hyatt's not listed as a respondent in those orders, but the hospital is. Those patients are now also suing the hospital and Hyatt.
130 County to 35.
This dash cam showing Washington County Sheriff's deputies serving the court order which demanded one of those patients' immediate release from Northwest.
Hey, people served!
Hyatt's attorney has responded to one of the lawsuits against him so far, denying the claims and asking for the case to be dismissed. The hospital also denied the allegations in that same lawsuit, and the plaintiff did dismiss the claims against a nurse that was previously listed as a defendant. These are not the only people to accuse Hyatt of holding them against their will. Darius Racy is also suing for false imprisonment related to his time at the hospital in April 2022.
Getting out of there messed me up. I'm just now getting back to work.
In a search warrant affidavit related to Hyatt's Medicaid fraud case, an investigator with the state's Medicaid Fraud Control Unit says at least some of the patients on the unit were being held against their will, and only a physician could make the decision to impose a 72-hour hold. A doctor can legally hold a patient with a behavioral health impairment involuntarily for 72 hours. But Van Wy says that's not what was happening. And you were there voluntarily.
Yeah, I was there voluntarily.
In his petition, his attorney said there was a long-standing practice of coercing patients into signing consents rather than letting due process take place. Other hospital employees not named in these petitions are now also being accused of mistreating patients. We found 2 arrest affidavits from March of 2 people who used to work here with Dr. Hyatt. They're accused of abusing patients last year. Affidavits say in March 2022, Colin Harlan and Isaiah Morris threw a patient to the ground. 2 days later, x-rays showed 2 of the patient's ribs were fractured. In another instance that month, Morris allegedly slapped a patient who was restrained in a restraint chair. Both men have pleaded not guilty. A hospital spokesperson telling us, quote, "It is not our practice to comment on current or former employees. I am able to confirm these individuals have not been employees of our health system since April 2022. Now out of the behavioral health unit.
I'm a good person, and I moved up here with a purpose.
They face new emotional challenges.
Now my struggle is I'm trying to figure out just how messed up am I and do I need this medicine?
An experience uniting these 4 strangers.
Oh my gosh, you saved my life.
And they believe many others who have yet to come forward. There have been more to come forward. When we did the interviews, only 3 people had filed lawsuits so far. Now that number's up to at least 11. Van Wy and Racy have both filed a lawsuit. Attorneys tell me more are still coming. We've reached out to Hyatt and his attorneys multiple times for an interview, but never heard back. The Office of Medicaid Inspector General says Hyatt's contract at Northwest was abruptly terminated in 2022. In the Arkansas Medical Practices Act, we found a requirement for hospitals to report in writing to the medical board any physician whose hospital privileges have been revoked, limited, or terminated for any cause, including resignation. But the medical board didn't have any such report. We asked the hospital why. It told us the hospital has been working cooperatively with the Arkansas Attorney General's office investigation concerning Dr. Hyatt since April of 2022. Given the nature and confidentiality